Imagine a country where a single loaf of bread costs 200 billion marks, where workers demand to be paid twice a day because their morning wages are completely worthless by sunset, and where families burn stacks of currency in their stoves because paper money is cheaper than actual firewood. This was Germany in 1923, suffering under the weight of hyperinflation. Just 6 years later, the Great Depression struck, plunging the nation into an economic apocalypse. By 1933, 6 million Germans were unemployed, representing 30% of the workforce. Starvation and political violence turned the streets into war zones. This was the broken, bankrupt nation that Adolf Hitler inherited when he took power in January 1933. Yet just 6 short years later, everything had changed. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland with 3 million highly trained soldiers, thousands of tanks, and thousands of advanced aircraft, revealing the most modern and terrifying military machine in Europe. How did a bankrupt country, legally restricted by the Versailles Treaty to a tiny army of 100,000 men with no tanks, submarines, or heavy artillery, finance the largest and most rapid rearmament program in human history? The answer does not lie in economic miracles, but in a fake shell company, a financial wizard, and a national-scale Ponzi scheme that made world war mathematically inevitable. To pull off this massive secret rearmament, Hitler needed an economic strategist who could conjure money out of thin air without triggering another round of devastating inflation or alerting foreign governments. He turned to Hjalmar Schacht, a brilliant banker and economist who had already saved the German currency once before in 1923. Hitler appointed Schacht as president of the Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, and later as Minister of Economics. Schacht faced a profound double challenge. If the German government printed billions of marks to pay weapons manufacturers, the currency would collapse again, a nightmare the German public would never tolerate. Furthermore, those massive expenditures would appear on official central bank balance sheets, alerting Britain and France to the illegal rearmament before Germany was strong enough to defend itself. Schacht's solution was the invisible money. In 1934, Schacht established a dummy corporation called the Metallurgical Research Company, known by its German acronym as MEFO. On paper, it was a legitimate research consortium formed by 4 major German industrial giants: Siemens, Krupp, Rheinmetall, and Gute Hoffnungshütte. In reality, MEFO did absolutely nothing. It was a shell company with nothing more than a letterhead and a bank account, capitalized with a meager 1 million marks. Yet this fake entity would become the primary engine funding the Nazi war machine. When the Nazi government ordered tanks, planes, or artillery from an arms manufacturer, it did not pay them in real currency. Instead, it paid them with MEFO bills. These bills were promissory notes, essentially post-dated checks issued by this fake company, promising full payment in 5 years. Because the arms manufacturers needed immediate cash to pay their workers and buy raw materials, they took these MEFO bills to private German banks. The private banks willingly exchanged the bills for cash because they knew the central bank secretly guaranteed them. The private banks then passed the bills to the Reichsbank, which used its money-issuing powers to convert them. Crucially, because MEFO was legally a private company, these transactions never appeared on the official government budget or the Reichsbank's public balance sheet. To the outside world, Germany's national debt looked stable, while beneath the surface, a massive shadow banking system was pumping billions into military production. Between 1934 and 1938, Germany secretly issued 12 billion marks in MEFO bills. To put that into perspective, Germany's entire national debt in 1932 was only 10 billion marks. The Nazi regime had more than doubled its debt in completely hidden obligations, creating a highly modern and terrifying military machine right under the noses of the Allies. But this system had a fatal built-in flaw. Those MEFO bills were designed to mature in 5 years. The very first bills issued in 1934 were set to come due in 1939, and the bankrupt German state did not possess the billions required to pay them back. The financial clock was ticking, and the entire structure transformed into a literal pyramid scheme. A typical Ponzi scheme relies on using money from new investors to pay off older ones. Nazi Germany's economy operated on the exact same logic, but instead of finding new investors, it had to conquer new territories to seize their wealth. The financial scheme desperately needed new capital to avoid an immediate and catastrophic default. The solution was systematic, state-sponsored plunder. In March 1938, Germany annexed Austria, immediately seizing its gold reserves, foreign currency, and industrial assets. 6 months later, through the Munich Agreement, they claimed the Sudetenland, and by March 1939, they occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia, absorbing the advanced Skoda arms works and more gold reserves. When Poland was invaded in September 1939, it brought agricultural production and millions of citizens who could be subjected to forced labor. The Nazi economy was structurally designed like a parasite. It could only survive by consuming new hosts. Hjalmar Schacht saw the approaching disaster. By 1937, he began warning Hitler that the economy was overheating, that astronomical military spending was unsustainable, and that hyperinflation was creeping back. Hitler ignored the warnings. In January 1939, just weeks before the first MEFO bills matured, Schacht and the directors of the Reichsbank submitted a desperate report demanding a drastic reduction in military expenditures and a return to a balanced budget to prevent total economic collapse. Hitler's response was swift. He fired Schacht as central bank president. The financial wizard had built a magnificent war machine, but he had also built a ticking economic time bomb, and Hitler's only strategy to stop it from exploding was to keep feeding it through continuous territorial expansion. As the war began, the funding methods grew even darker and more predatory. In occupied France, Germany imposed staggering occupation costs, forcing the French government to pay 400 million francs every single day, essentially forcing France to fund its own subjugation. In the Soviet Union, the regime planned the wholesale extraction of grain, oil, and minerals to sustain the home front. Beyond material plunder, the Nazi war economy weaponized slave labor. Millions of concentration camp prisoners and prisoners of war were loaned out to major German corporations like IG Farben, Siemens, and Krupp to manufacture weapons and mine resources under brutal conditions. When these workers died from exhaustion or starvation, they were simply replaced. The entire economic model was inextricably linked to genocide. The regime also routinely defrauded its own citizens. A prime example was the Volkswagen program, where everyday Germans were encouraged to deposit a portion of their wages each month into a specialized savings account to eventually purchase a people's car. The state collected 275 million marks from hopeful citizens, but not a single civilian vehicle was ever delivered. The factory was immediately converted to manufacture military vehicles instead, and the citizens' savings were absorbed into the war effort. Furthermore, Hitler defaulted on massive foreign loans that Germany had borrowed from Britain, France, and the United States during the 1920s, using the unpaid capital to build the very weapons that would be turned against those nations. Simultaneously, the systematic persecution of Jewish citizens served a dual purpose: ideological hatred and massive financial theft, as the state confiscated billions in Jewish businesses, properties, bank accounts, and art to fund the treasury. By 1939, Hitler had run out of peaceful financial maneuvers. He was faced with an absolute ultimatum: halt rearmament and watch the German economy implode into bankruptcy, or go to war and use foreign conquest to pay the bills. He chose war. The grand military machine that terrorized Europe was not funded by genuine economic productivity or financial strength. It was financed by an elaborate shell game of hidden debt, astronomical theft, uncompensated labor, and global predation. The Nazi economy was never built to sustain peace, it was engineered explicitly for destruction, and the moment the conquests stopped, the entire financial house of cards collapsed alongside the regime.